Welcome to a spontaneous special edition of Soft Power TV. We're ranting about Reiki today. And if you're here live, then it's because you probably caught our email that said, Reiki Masters, we need to talk. Yeah, we got some people already in here. Welcome. Let us know where you're joining from. If we are friends, if you're new here and you are a practitioner that heard we are talking fairy Reiki and answered that call, come on in, grab a beverage, get settled. We're going to have a cozy convo for just about an hour today. We're actually just saying, like, this topic almost feels too big to tackle in an hour. So just know that today, just to give you a little background, we are here to talk about Reiki from the lens of practitioners who are actively decolonizing and sharing that process and conversation. If you're new and you've never heard about Reiki before, it may not be the topic. This may not be the conversation for you. It might go over your head, but stick around anyways, and you might learn something because we're really digging into ancestor work, cultural appropriation, decolonizing our spiritual practices. And with that said, I'm going to pass it on to, I'm Siobhan Duras. I am a Reiki practitioner, and I am joined with my fellow Aquarius moon and practitioner, Marta Elise, and I'll pass it to you for a little intro.
Hi. As Siobhan said, I am also a Reiki practitioner. I have been working sort of with the question of how to authentically and in a way that feels ethical to me practice Reiki for about the past 2.5 years. And I got certified 4 years ago. My story with Reiki goes back more than that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, so through actually Siobhan's Care Immersion, that's when I came to really start to feel rooted in my decolonization practice. And it's been over the past couple of months that I've been really feeling rooted in digging into my ancestral healing lineages.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Marta. A little background for those whose this is your first time watching Soft Power TV. Soft Power is a collective of artist healers that are really interested in the question of reconnecting to ancestral roots and building ancient futures, as Flo I've heard call it before, building ancient futures and interrogating everything we've known to be true. All of our gatherings, live streams, conversations kind of trend around this energy of being a soft landing space for unraveling and really exploring what authentic integrity, relationships of integrity with the earth, with each other, for revolution, for liberation, all of that could look like. So with that said, we're going to just start with a breath together. Let's take 3 breaths together. And we are now all tapped into the soft power frequency. One of our core values with soft power is being soul sensitive, and that is keeping in mind the nervous system and the ways that comes into play with our ability to have conversations of examining our values, exploring into different ways of being. So Marta and I have been in connection online probably at least a year now, right? I think since last year, and then in deeper conversation through the Care Immersion and as a guest on Tapped In since probably the spring of this year. So this is a conversation between 2 cosmic colleagues, as I like to put it, as I consider us, and friends, I think. Are we friends yet, Marta?
Yes.
And friends that have been having this conversation in groups, in kind of texting, and we've been saying to each other for a while now, like, we need to just get on and record this conversation. And then yesterday, Marta hit me up saying, tell me why I just got an ad for Fairy Reiki. And we were like, all right, this is the moment. Should we go record it offline? We're like, let's just take it live. That kind of seems to be the best way we approach things, is just fleshing it out live. So know that we're not experts. We're not here to flex expertise. We're here to just share the questions we've been asking ourselves as practitioners. Because I think we're in a collective moment of examining and looking at everything we've known to be true, that we've raised to be true, and just really reconsenting to what we believe in, what feels aligned to us. So everything we're saying is an invitation of that nature, that please filter through what's right for you. We're not here to tell people what's right or wrong. We're just here to be really open about this journey, because it's been really interesting so far. And so with that said, I just want to open up that question of Marta of like, what was your introduction? What was your entry point to Reiki, receiving it, and then as a practitioner?
Yeah, so when I was 17, I had a really terrible experience where I suspect I had an ovarian cyst burst, and it happened on a Friday. My mom was like, well, we can go to the ER. And I really did not want to go to the ER on a Friday. I don't know about anyone else, but near me, the ER on a Friday is an absolute nightmare. And she was like, well, we can try this other thing. And she brought me to a Reiki practitioner, and I literally like hobbled in, couldn't really walk. And I walked out upright and did not have any pain after that. And it was the most incredible experience. I mean, I saw colors. Like, I wasn't at this point like really deep into meditation or trance or anything like that, but I definitely had an incredibly like mystical experience. And then in the months after that, I started just intuitively, like afterwards, I just could intuitively figure out like, oh, you kind of like let something else drop in and flow through you, and like let that energy flow. And so I started doing it for my pets, doing it for family. I would show friends kind of as like, look what I can do. Like, my hands are going to get really hot, watch. And then so I was kind of like just casually interacting with this energy for about 10 years. And then I had an experience with a very haunted apartment, which is a story for another day. But again, I sought the help of a Reiki practitioner for that, because it was just like all of the angst was like really in my body from that. And she gave me some tips, and it kind of, that whole experience made me feel like, okay, I need to dive deeper into spirituality. I need to really learn how to hone energy, and Reiki was sort of my starting point. So I was trained in Reiki 1 and 2 in 2019, about 6 months apart. And then in January of 2021, I had an opportunity to get like master level certification or training. And it was only like, I think it was only $400, which is kind of unheard of. Most master level trainings that I've seen are like in the thousands. And I was like, well, if I'm ever going to do it, like, now's the time. And so I did that. But I was supposed to like submit sort of like case studies, like either on myself or like on clients. Like, these were like the results, or this is what I noticed. And that was like how I was supposed to get my certificate, and like just ADHD brain. But I also think that part of me was like, do I really get to call myself a Reiki master? Like, I don't know. And so that was sort of the beginning, I think, of me like really questioning. And then I just wanted to read everything I could, even though I had like taken, all 3 levels. I just wanted to read everything I could. And the more that I read, the more I was like, that's interesting. Like, so there's like different, I don't know. I remember reading one book, and there were all these people that were adding their own symbols and all these different types of Reiki. And I was like, but isn't this like supposed to be source energy, and we're kind of changing it to what we want it to be? That was sort of the start of me being like, I need to kind of not step back, but in a way, yes. And then, yeah, that really felt off, like that. Just the idea that we could take something and then change, because it's supposed to be a tradition, right? But we're changing the tradition, and I couldn't wrap my head around that. And I also had felt for a really long time like a deep sense of imposter syndrome, and I couldn't figure out why, because I knew that I was channeling authentically, and I knew that it was really powerful medicine that I was channeling, but something just still didn't feel right. So about a little more than a year ago, I started working with a mentor, and she was also trained in Reiki, and we kind of started this conversation of like, well, why does it feel inauthentic? And, you know, she encouraged me to learn more about ancestral practices, but that felt very, at the time, like really overwhelming, because I couldn't find a lot. So my ancestry is sort of all over the place, but majority is Northern European. And a lot of information about traditional folk healing practices has either been watered down or it's really difficult to find. So that's when I took a step back from that. And then last year, actually earlier this year, I took Marika Clymer's Decolonizing Reiki course. And that sort of put a lot of things that felt off into perspective for me. Do you want me to keep going? Because I could just keep going.
Because I just so much resonates with me, with just like once all these different things kept getting introduced, I was like, hold on, y'all, like I'm losing the plot. I'm losing the plot here. And so my entry point into Reiki, or my awareness of it, actually sort of began when I was in a business program a few years ago. And in that program was somebody who was newly pregnant, and Tiffany, and she approached me and said, hey, you're a birth worker. I'm a Reiki practitioner. I would love to have somebody who could give me Reiki during my labor and birth process. Would you be down to trade and be my doula, and I'll train you in Reiki? And I was like, yeah, for sure. That's amazing. And I really relate to that, like, first feeling when you first activate it and you just feel like, oh my God, like I am like a wizard with these magical hands. And I remember doing like postpartum on using it with the babies and watching, like, even from across the room, like kind of activating distance Reiki across the room. And this baby, just like this one particular baby, Asher, I was with him 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. every night. And just seeing the way it calmed him, just being like, oh my God, ultimate life hack, which, you know, very colonial mindset, ultimate life hack with something. Those are probably not phrases that should be associated with it. But at the same time, I'm like, well, spirituality and spiritual healing is kind of like the ultimate life hack. But after I started that journey, I told my mom, and my mom goes, oh yeah, that's like Rosie's light. And I was like, yeah. So she reminded me of my Roseanne, who was one of those stories. I'm trying to keep it brief. She's alive still, is my late Nana's friend. She was a nun at the school that my dad went to as a kid, and she became friends with my Nana because she had my aunt who had disabilities and couldn't go to the regular school, and she like left the convent and started a school for disabled kids out of my grandma's basement, is their story. So Rosie was a nun. And she left the convent, and then in, I think, the early 90s, she got initiated into Sukyo Mahikari, which I don't know a lot, and I've tried to find info, but my understanding is that it's like kind of a cult, very like closed off. Even when I was kind of expressing interest to her, she was like, I don't know if you can handle it. It's very serious and dedicated. And so she was always growing up giving light. And it's the same thing as Reiki. But now I understand this group to, kind of be like, well, you have to do it through this. And if you leave, you will lose that access, which is what tipped me off to the cult part. But he checked into rehab. And I always thought it was kind of random that Roseanne was the one at my birth. And it was just like, oh, she's just the person that was around and free to go to the hospital with my mom. But then my mom goes, oh, she was giving me light the whole time. And so that was like this big revelation that was like, oh my gosh. So I literally like entered the world receiving this, and that still kind of trips me out. And I haven't gotten to really even interrogate that angle of it yet. But that was technically my first intro into Reiki, was receiving this energy medicine at birth, and then through a birthwork trade being reintroduced. And so going through that training one-on-one with Tiffany was really cool because it was private. And so I don't really know, when I learned later how it's typically handled with like a weekend training, I was like, oh, it made sense in some ways, because I'm like, yeah, that's like if this is a gift that everyone possesses, that we like, the whole idea of like bumping your elbow and rubbing it, and, headaches and things like that, self-healing, that made sense as far as the simplicity. But then what kind of was disconnecting was the idea of attunements, that like you were going in and imprinting a symbol on my energetic body, and just feeling like, that just doesn't intuitively make sense to me. Like, I don't think you're giving me anything. Then a friend sent me a TikTok that was somebody talking about how they went through it, and that they had like really scary experiences, and that Reiki, there was like this TikTok going around that was like, Reiki's evil. I went through an experience and all these bad things started happening. I saw the devil and all this stuff. And I have to get the symbols removed off of me. And I was just like, I don't think there's any type of thing that could literally be so imprinted beyond your ability to remove it. Definitely not something that was done in like a weekend training. Like, I really don't think they have the power to like stamp my soul for eternity. But that felt really off. And then I also, a year ago, took the Marika Clymer's Decolonizing Reiki course. And the language that she used, why I loved it so much, was, again, because of the simplicity of it. Her calling it, energetic ecology and energetic frameworks. And this idea that's like, yeah, we all have a unique framework that we are here to understand the nuances and the unique mechanics of. That really resonated. Or I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense why when I started, because that kind of was how Tiffany taught it, was like, you're noticing for how it shows up for you. The first time she did a session on me, she's seeing dragons, she's seeing all this stuff on me, and I'm like, okay, that's not how I experience it at all. And I was able to kind of be nurtured in developing an intuitive practice without a lot of the rules. But that, again, similar to you, was like, I'm Jupiter ruled, and I love being expansive, but I was like, it has to be expansive. And I'm also a projector. Like, I need to see the web. I need to see like what this is, where this is coming from, because anything goes feels a little bit reckless. So yeah, taking Marika's course, and then also the other part that stood out to me that I took a lot of value from was her simply calling it co-regulation, and saying that, these masters, and just the inherent like trigger of the word master of anything, that I'm clearly not a master. I was like, there's no way. And I had a master level training. But the idea that these practitioners are basically holding down the channel to co-regulate together made a lot more intuitive sense. And now that I've done so many, I'm like, yeah, that is what we're doing. We're like being those connector pieces, conductors of energy to channel and facilitate. And I'm not giving you anything. I'm not giving or taking anything really. I'm just connecting and helping be a channel, which is why I love when you said that you call yourself a cosmic energy channel. And we'll get into like the details of names. Did your power go out?
My light is on a timer and I forgot, so I just have to turn it back on. It just went to like the purple mode.
Love. It's still a mood. Mood or vibe, audience. A mood or a vibe. But just bringing it back with all of that, I'm like, I think the signs were always there from the start that something was slightly not clicking. And I've heard from other people, even just sharing that we were going to have this conversation today, that were like, yeah, I'm going to, something feels off. And until I feel comfortable taking another step forward, I'm going to need to reevaluate. So that is sort of the process that you and I have been in. This seems like this whole year has just been like, what are we doing here? Let's just pause and take a look. But then both of us recently started, I think, recommitting back into a more, for me, I could say, and it seems like for you too, of just like, okay, we feel confident enough now and that this is important enough to continue taking steps forward and sharing. And so I kind of want to talk about that process. Because you joined the Care Immersion. And for those who, if it's your first time meeting Marta and I, the Care Immersion is the group within Soft Power that I lead for caregivers. And the whole intention is to be embodied and in integrity and trauma informed with our service practices. So everybody in there are people who are of service to the collective in some ways. Marta, you've been of service as a spiritual, you have your titles, but I never know how to group everyone. As a professional witch, you've already been in the game, and other people are, where they're at on their journey, sharing their gift, which essentially boils down to being yourself and being getting to know our authentic frequency and really listening for what is our gift of care to offer to the collective wherever we're at. And so with all of that, it's my second year running the Care Immersion. And last year I felt called to share Reiki. And given that I had not been practicing it for very long, I was a little bit torn. But as folks in the Care Immersion know, my whole approach of doing business and designing things is rooted in listening to my ancestors and sitting at my altar and asking, what is it that these people need from me? And it was clear that Reiki was supposed to be shared. And so as we geared up for the Reiki module or lesson this summer, I had my notes from the year before, which was prior to taking Marika Clymer's course, but still having thought about decolonizing a lot. But when I was preparing for it, kind of the day of or the day before, I felt this really strong pause that was we're not actually doing Reiki here. What are we doing? And so I spent a lot of time at the altar talking to my guides and Reiki spirits about how do I approach this? Because y'all clearly want me to do something with this, but it's not Reiki. Should I call it Reiki? And I was very kind of torn between this commitment that I made, knowing that a lot of people signed up to learn Reiki. And that was kind of one of their most appealing parts of joining the Care Immersion, was because we were going to be doing Reiki, and the integrity of I'm being called to shift. And that's kind of been the constant tension for both of us, I think, of just how do I upkeep my commitment and honor the value of something while also being really curious about being really committed to authenticity. So what came out of that on the second piece of our Reiki lesson was this trance journey that I did right before we went live today, because I wanted to just experience it myself and be reminded too. But the guiding question that I repeated was going into this trance journey and meeting with the Reiki spirits was, is Reiki the aligned medicine for my path? That was kind of the point, was that we go into this visualization. We called in an ancestor or a spirit guide who guides us in our energy work practices. And they brought us to kind of the gates of Reiki where we asked, is Reiki the aligned medicine for my path? And so I want to leave it there and throw it to you if you're down to whatever you want to share from that experience. Cause I loved, I've been fascinated ever since hearing what you experienced in that.
Yeah. So it was really funny because like I started to like go in, like I saw it as like a garden, right? Like a Reiki garden. And I like started to go in because I was like, yeah, I've been here before. And like they were literally like, you need to get out. Like they were like, bye. Like I got kicked out and I was like, okay, like now what? And then I got sent over and I met like this really like intense looking guide who I was like, okay, well, what's your name? He identified as Alex, and he was like, well, you're from like a long lineage of healers, and that goes to my grandfather's side, and they emigrated from Norway. And this guy looked like a king. Like the way he was dressed, I was like, what the hell is this? Like it was really. And later on I asked, like, are you royalty? Like, what is this? And he was like, no, this is just like how we dress, like just like really big robe and like a really big hat. And I guess, I mean, it's cold there, right? So sure. And then immediately I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And the next day, of course, I start like Googling like traditional like Nordic healing. And I found this article called Healing in the Sami North from the National Library of Medicine. And there's a piece in it that talks about, they interviewed all these different healers that were practicing indigenous Norwegian healing or indigenous Sami healing, because the Sami are not Norwegian. That's another story for another day. But they were Norwegianized. But anyway,
Wait,
so
can I interrupt this thought? Have
yeah,
you seen Frozen 2?
no,
Okay, because I'm gonna look up if this is who they're referencing, because Frozen 2 is actually got a land back plot. It's got a very like indigenous people of the forest, and I think they're in there. It's Norwegian, I think, out there. Well, not Norwegian because I think it's nationless, but they're like in the fjords, you know.
yeah,
I'm gonna look that up after if that is what it's based off of.
cool. So yeah, so they interviewed all these different people for this article and had all these stories, but the one that stuck with me and that was really like really hit me was that a lot of times Sami healers will see energy and need to pull it out. And that is something that I've always done. Like when I feel a blockage or anything like that, I'm always like, oh, I have to like pull this out and like just get it off of you. And then the other thing that happened for me immediately once I figured out or like tapped into being able to channel this, because back to attunements, like you said, that felt really strange to me because I feel like I was quote unquote spontaneously attuned, but a lot of people will say, well, that can't happen. But I think that it absolutely can happen, because at the heart of it, what we're doing is connecting with energy that, in my view, is of Earth and of the cosmos. And we're being like a bridge between those two things. And now I've forgotten where I was going. Oh, I would see color. I would feel like into the color that was quote unquote, like you could say, out of alignment, and then the color that was needed to like bring back into alignment. And that sort of just reading that, like the pulling out thing, I was like, oh, okay, so that has something that's always been with me. And the color thing, because that's not really anything that I learned in my training for Reiki. And so I kind of felt like, in order to really do this, I just have to send light, you know, and I kind of took away my, my natural, like, intuitive instinct to shut off my critical thinking brain and allow what comes through to come through, and kind of put more of this critical lens on it and like, well, I have to do it this way if I want to do it correctly. And since that trance journey experience, I have really felt a lot of like pressure and weight fall away. Like, oh, okay, like that whole imposter syndrome thing is totally gone, because I'm like, oh, this is rooted like authentically within me, and I was always, quote unquote, doing it right because I was doing what I was led to do naturally. And it's just been very interesting to kind of come back to that while still acknowledging that a lot of what I learned about how to channel energy in like a safe way was through the framework of Reiki. Because when I was younger and I would do it, I would often get tired, and I didn't have those sort of, like, I guess you could say, energetic boundaries, or like a real, I wouldn't ground before. Like, I didn't know. So a lot of the things that I learned from my Reiki training and from my practice, I still hold on to and are still really meaningful and important to me. But I also feel like I have really come back to a place of connecting with the energy that I was always connecting with before, as opposed to reaching for something else that I thought I was supposed to be using or channeling.
Wow. Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking, I feel like most practitioners are probably experiencing something similar, because most I talk to say something along the lines of like, well, it's really personal and intuitive the way that I do it. And that is how Tiffany taught me. And I remember the first time she was like clearing and cutting the cord between us at the end of the session. She was like, notice how it feels right to you, because she was like, I think using a sword, and for me, I was seeing kind of like the muck of the energy as like, and I don't know if this is a universal understanding, but like making soup, making like a beef soup where you're boiling it, and you know the like little, I don't know if scum's the right word, but like, you know what I'm talking about, the little like foamy meat scum that floats to the top. And this is how my mom always made soup, is that would float to the top, and she would like kind of like scrape it off the top and dump it. That's how I would see it. And then similarly too, and I have questions about the colors, but when I was doing it in person, having this urge to just put my hands on them, because and I did kind of know this, but I have also since learned more that in Filipino energetic healing, which that's not really the best way to call it, but hilo is kind of Filipino massage and chiropractic that has the energy healing aspect, but it's hands-on. It's like the idea is, the framework is that the layers of the subtle body going outward are also going inward. So pressing deeper in to, does that make sense, to like reach these other layers, so it's reflective in that way into the body. So that sounded really right. That was like, yeah, like giving these kind of pressure intuitive body work sessions, but then also stopping myself, because I stopped myself feeling like, well, that's well, one, it just scares me anytime getting into like hands-on, especially because I work with pregnant people. I always get worried of like, if I'm gonna, the licensing of massage and all that stuff. But again, thinking like, well, this isn't how I've read it. And even as I was going through Marika's decolonizing Reiki course, I think she's it sounded like this was a recording from a live class, because there was a question at one point that was like, "Do we even call any of this Reiki anymore?" And she laughs and is like, "Yeah, it's still Reiki, like, but I get why you're confused," because that was where I was coming in the process of decolonizing to like, well, why are we even calling this Reiki at all? And so I think coming back to just definitions for the practitioners that are listening, like, we kind of have two meanings of Reiki floating around, because one is this just synonymous with energy healing that everybody uses to apply to their practice. And anytime I have like named a critique of that on threads, or this happened on threads and on Twitter, both on separate times, but people replied very upset, saying that they didn't like it. They didn't like that I was, or I shouldn't say they didn't like it. I could tell that there was a disconnect between in the understanding, because they were thinking about Reiki as synonymous with energy healing globally, and I was talking about Reiki as specific to Japanese culture. And really, if you dig deeper, Reiki, when you go into like Shintoism, they weren't calling it Reiki either. There's all these other names. So really, like, Reiki as we know it is what, like 100 years old barely, for how we've been mostly discussing it. But then there was this one interaction with somebody where they were bringing up Egyptian Reiki, and they seemed very informed on the history of, I think, Kemetic Reiki. But I was just still like, but it's not Reiki. They wouldn't have called it Reiki. That word, the actual word, is Japanese, and that matters. And so it does matter and it doesn't. And I think that's where I want to steer us into the conversation of like, what is the value to you of this Western, I want to say like common Reiki. What is the value of common Reiki as practitioners? Um, And what words would you use if we weren't confined to kind of this like common understanding of what Reiki is?
I think there's a lot of value in it, in that it's an entry point, and it's, like, there's always like a catch-22 whenever something becomes really digestible, right? Like if you think about yoga has been incredibly watered down in the Western world, but it still offers a lot of good to people, and it still is an entry point for people to, connect to their body, to their spirit. I mean, I'm not talking about like goat yoga or like even like all the different like crazy things that people have gone and done with yoga. But so I think that like common Western Reiki, there's a lot of value in that for being an entry point to understanding that working with subtle energies and the subtle body has a real impact. Like there have been a lot of really valuable studies done that have been done because of Reiki. So it's actually been proven. One of the things that I always come back to is that it's been proven that Reiki can lower blood pressure. So that means that energy healing, this sort of co-regulation, can lower blood pressure. And I really struggled with like, do I get to call what I do Reiki? And that's sort of something that I've been working through over the past year, is like, do I get to call it that? And after my trance journey and my experience, I was like, okay, it's cosmic energy channeling. That's what I'm doing. And that's what I consider myself to be now. But I still have the word Reiki on my booking page because it's what people understand. No one is Googling cosmic energy channeling until I can like carve a path and make that sort of a mainstream term, nobody's going to find me if I use that as a keyword. That's not a searchable keyword at this point. So I feel like, there's, and again, like we're having this conversation because of Reiki, right? So like it's an entry point, I feel like, for people to connect with and reclaim something that I think is everyone's birthright. I don't think that I'm special because I figured out at 17 intuitively how to channel this energy. I think that I had a certain upbringing that made me open to that. I think I have a certain disposition that made me open to that, but that doesn't mean that like I have all the answers and I like am like, and because I went and I got Reiki trained and I got attuned, like I don't think that makes me that gives me any more of a right to this energy, because I think that it belongs to all of us. And then something I also really want to mention too is that personally for me, going back to energetic frameworks and ecological, like energetic ecology, one thing I noticed for myself really early on was that if I looked at trees, I could get the energy to flow really, really like strongly. And that's something that I just remembered like a couple months ago, like, oh yeah, I used to like just look out the window when I would do this. And now it looks different in that I like imagine myself being rooted, but I'm like, oh, it's always been earth-based for me. And I think that if we can approach it that way and explain it to people that way, I think it can open a lot more doors to deepening relationship with the land and the earth that holds us.
Yeah, earth-based healing has been one of the ways, I think, that's of phrasing it that's really resonated for me. Just earth-based energy, earth-based healing. That was intuitive from the start. Every time was this. I mean, you've experienced a lot of trance journeys with me now, so every time I really go directly to that, like plugging, I see it as just our bodies plugging back into earth through the mind's eye, however that comes, roots, cords, whatever, being held so that this energy can flow through us. And then what that safety in our body can open us up to explore. And, learning about the nervous system really reinforce that idea. That's like when we're disconnected, we don't experience, when we're at that, what is it called? The dorsal vagal state, we're not able to perceive connection to others. And that when we are in this like polyvagal activation, that is where connection happens. And that connection is the root of all healing. I believe that connecting back to these sources and what can flow through scientifically and spiritually, that is, I guess, how we can heal. And it does feel so important for people to know. So that is part of that balance. It's like, okay, how can we now reach the people? And so right before this, when I experienced the Reiki journey myself, I played back the recording when it came to the point of being at the gates of Reiki and asking this spirit. I felt it was definitely like a man. It was a man energy. I felt like it was Usui, Mikao Usui, or at least an expression. But when the question was, is Reiki the aligned medicine for my path? The answer from him was, yes, it is by name. So speak it in ways that others can understand and be their bridge back home. That was a message that I just got like an hour ago. It was like, be their bridge back home. And so placing us in this moment of collective reckoning with colonization and global imperialism, understanding that, researching, we think about colonization usually for people, right, recent history, for good reason, focuses on people of the global majority in the global south, brown and black people, not white people. But even digging into that, bringing up that grief of disconnection from our roots, that we know Norway, we know Ireland, but that colonization and that removal of those traditions, they were the first ones on this path. And then we know that the whole system twisted to utilize race as a piece of this power dynamic. But before that, and this is not at all comparing them, but the reason I'm saying this is to say that European history has been erased too, that we're in this situation because of that, because of the disconnection that is so deep, that finding out what we would call laying hands or any of these cosmic channeling methods is so far gone. In some ways, Asian folks, because I'm Filipino and of Celtic descent, in some ways I have more access to my pre-colonial information as a Filipino than I do as an Irish person, because it's slightly more recent. And I think that I was thinking about this, and I think that maybe part of why Reiki is that entry point is because given all the imperialism, even calling Reiki a Japanese tradition, knowing that there are still indigenous groups within what we know as Japan that are not Japanese, Okinawans, Ainu people, they are indigenous groups that fall under now Japan. But I was thinking about why Reiki is that entry point back to it for a generation of colonized, disconnected people. And some of it has to do with the ways that East Asian traditions have preserved some of that spirituality, or have not fully separated the spiritual from the physical. And in some ways, that is that gift to us that people can find through Reiki, which is circulating, letting that be a path back to authentic ancestors, back to just our intuition. Because for a lot of us doing the research, you probably can't find a picture of the outfit that you saw Alex in. And I've seen things too. I've had a lot of clients in session see ancestors who are in these costumes, in these adornments that we're never going to have pictures of. And that's why I say the revolution will be mystical, because so much of it is going to need to be based on our ability to access discernment and our intuition and these psychic gifts that are going to show us and tell us these stories, and trusting that those stories have something to teach us, even if we can't verify with primary sources. Because that's more part of the decolonizing, is what are we considering valid research when it comes to ancestor work? Is it just what we could find on Wikipedia? Like, very few percentage of the population has that access, has that privilege. And so, like, new ways of, I don't know, like peer reviewing information, even, I'm really curious, like moving forward too, about talking to other people who've descended from places like Norway and being like, what have we all channeled? What have we all seen? And like developing this understanding would be really cool. I've seen other people reply of like Celtic roots. Like, I would love to be in conversation with a group of people of like, what do your energy guides look like? And just kind of exploring, like, we are unearthing again and rechanneling this important reconnection so that we can modernize and like be rooted. Because that's where, when I say this is related to, the genocide happening right, that we're all witnessing in Palestine, we're witnessing, and again, this is really oversimplifying in some ways, but in some ways we're really but we are really witnessing the impact of Jewish Zionists who are not fully connected to those roots through ancestor work, repeating the same exact cycle of harm because there's a disconnection in those roots, really grounding where these actions are coming from. And of course, that's very like more complex than I've just stated it, but I feel like I just said a lot. What are you thinking right now? I blacked out a little bit.
Yeah, what's really sticking with me with what you just said is like how disconnection creates more disconnection. You know, like you tied in really beautifully actually with what you said about how Europe was one of the first places to experience colonization, right? Where all of these, like you said, like I have Celtic ancestors, and I don't know anything really about them like pre-colonization, and I don't know a lot about Norway pre-colonization, and that sort of set the stage for where we are now. And then if you, when talking about what's happening currently in Palestine, it's again people who have been disconnected who are now creating more disconnection from the land, from just culture, really, from roots. And it's just a cycle that perpetuates itself. And if we aren't willing to examine the roots of it and also say, okay, well, how do my choices and my actions sort of perpetuate this? And it feels really like heavy to say that about Reiki, but when, you know, I got an ad for freaking fairy Reiki.
I was going to say, let's bring it to fairy Reiki.
So I got this ad, and I don't know, it was like fairy Reiki, whatever. And I was like, what the hell is fairy Reiki? And so I pulled up the website because I Googled it. And these jokers had the audacity to say that it incorporates the 4 elements and
the caucasity.
Yes, and for some it is a spiritual path with roots forged centuries ago with Celtic ancestors and shamanic tribesmen, which, like, can you, I don't know, what it easily fits into people's daily practices. In a nutshell, fairy Reiki is a healing journey that allows for a more profound connection with Mother Earth. But then why do you have to call it fairy Reiki? Like,
Yeah, because it's like at the core, I could vibe with it. Celtic, Fae, like we love some Fae, we love some Earth stewards and warriors and defenders. And maybe it was part of that. Probably part of that was people recognize Reiki.
Yeah,
my guess.
maybe.
It could be just as simple as that. Like, people recognize Reiki. We're bringing it back to the Celtic roots, but people know the word Reiki. But it's just still like,
I feel like not acknowledging that is
they
the
say
problem.
nah. All I gotta say is it does make me question your relationship to, it's the same thing right now, actually, the same feeling I have with spiritualists who are unwilling to interrogate Zionism. It's like, believe whatever you want. Actually, at the core, though, I just don't trust you as a spiritualist because the land is loud, the Fae are loud, and so where is your information coming from? Because I'm getting a little sus there.
Yeah, like, I would feel differently about it, I think, if there was like an acknowledgement kind of what we're talking about, right? Like, okay, well, Reiki is the one entry point, and like this is how we're connecting with these spirits, but it feels very commodified, and it feels very like, just, I want it to be something more special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's almost the way that I think I've been shifting with even witchcraft is just like, and this is, deeply personal for every person. But for me, I've been thinking like, well, would I really consider myself a witch, or do I? Yeah. And yes, in a lot of ways, the answer is for sure yes. But also, does everybody who engages and sees the world like this, does that make them a witch? No, that's just animism. And that's why I've been really expanding. That's like, I don't actually want to make it so special and unique and fringe to understand magic and engage with what I believe, like you said, is our birthright, is inherent within us, is just waiting for us to like notice really and acknowledge. That's how I see all of it, is that, you know, we see these things floating around too of like, not everyone has to do ancestor work. Your spiritual practice is valid without ancestor work. I just can't fathom what that would look like without ancestor work, because they're there. You're saying to them, oh, I have racist ancestors, so I don't need them. And I'm like, they're standing there like, rude. I'm not. I don't even know what a white person is. I'm freaking Sami. You know, like what even is a white person? That's the like, you know, I see that all the time with people who are embarrassed to start ancestor work because they have these harmful lineages. And I'm just like, at this point in history, I always like to just bring back to this moment. It's like, it feels like this is the moment where all the marbles were just tossed and it's up to every individual to choose. And I really, really believe that we are just at this moment on this timeline that is saying the red and blue pill is colonizer, indigenous. That's your orientation to the land. And pick one, because to me, that's what indigeneity like means to me. And it's just like, again, reconsenting, re-choosing, and reevaluating how we want to engage. And so when it comes to Reiki, you know, knowing now that the alleged spirit of Usui said, be the bridges back home, that's what I would hope, you know, saying that we went on live today to talk to other practitioners. The thing I always come back to again is like, in conversations of cultural appropriation, not only is it about doing what's like right and of integrity, and I don't like using those words like right or wrong, but it's also the just even like the effectiveness of your medicine. Like, even if white sage, you know, if you didn't know that white sage, indigenous people in North America have said, please stop burning or cleansing with it, it just doesn't hit. Even if you're like, oh, well, I don't really care about that. It just doesn't work for you because it's not of your framework. It's not of your lineage. And I don't like, I want the shit that hits hard. I want the protective measures that are going to protect me because it's getting fucking gnarly out here. And that's necessary. And I think that those roots, as like, we're like in this, like, what's going to hold you down? It's your roots are going to keep you from snapping and breaking. And we're seeing a lot of people snap and float off into ascension and 5D and all of that. And it's like, where are you going? Because you came back to Earth, and I'm going to LOL when the next life you're right back here because you missed the fucking plot. Like, I told myself I wasn't going to get shady in my assessment, but I always feel this whole conversation is very Aquarius moon conundrums, because it's like, we know better, we see a different way, but how are we thinking about everybody? How are we still showing up for our responsibility of people finding us and reaching us? That's one question in it. And I think, just to like wrap up the thought, and I want your thoughts on this too, please, it's just like, to me, what it all comes down to is that no one can tell you what's right or wrong in your practice. And that there may be people who are watching this and being like, after all of that, y'all concluded that you're still going to be Reiki practitioners. And that's valid. That's really valid. And if that feels really off to you, you may not have the same considerations, or you just don't have the same call that we do for what our path is. And for me, very clearly, the path has been to lead people in and bring them back home. And if the ways I need to lead people in are using language that I feel comfortable and is consensual, that is not for me to say it's for everybody. That's why in that journey, I didn't assume that every single person was gonna not get consent or get consent. It was, let us know. And I think it was the one person of Japanese lineage, or Okinawan, actually, I should say, Japanese nationality, that they were the only one. And unsurprising, of course, because they're Okinawan. But it's really not for us to decide that for everybody. And I think that just brings me back to what I always think is the biggest task of our lifetimes, which is developing our intuition and discernment and our self-secureness, because we're getting in this place where people are bickering and saying what's right and wrong, and you've just got to know what's right for you, because it might look really problematic on the outside. We may even be judging you. Maybe fairy Reiki, you were really, really called to that, and we're unfairly coming for you. Cool. Ignore us then. Because if your intuition said do it, sure. And if that is just part of your path, and I think that too, that I'm like, maybe it's problematic, but that's part of your path. And everybody who joined the training is that you all now have this experience that's going to lay the foundation for whatever that next thing is.
Yeah.
Final thoughts, Marta? And what would you like other practitioners to know or think about?
I feel like everything you just said, and it actually, at the end, I was thinking, like, that's so emergent, right? Like, when you think about one path, like, you start out one way and then the path, like, leads you somewhere else, but in reality, it's all leading to the same place. So I 100% agree that everyone has to sit with themselves and come to their own conclusions of what is right and authentic for them. And for me, it was, I really wanted to, like, I was considering a year and a half ago, like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this work at all. Like, maybe this is not what I should be doing, because it didn't feel authentic and right. And, you know, I tried for years to, like, avoid, I did not want to identify as a healer. Like, I did not, I'm not allowed to not identify as that. I'm just not allowed to in this lifetime. It's a big part of why I'm here. But I'm also, like you said, I'm not here to tell anybody, like, what their path is. And I feel like, don't let anyone rob you of your own self-discovery. That's what I would leave people with.
Don't let others rob you from your own self-discovery. Love that. I want to close this off with, I always quote the fairy goddess at some point, but we need you to be you. That is it. We need you to be you. Our mission, your mission, my mission is to be ourselves, I see our Reiki paths as a responsibility to explore these frameworks so that we can guide others, and just through being ourselves, and that at the core, even if we never held another session, never talked about this publicly again, it's all comes back to knowing yourself and being you and having the courage to find it. And so, not to like weave this into a promo for soft power, but like I am, because that's the whole reason we have gathered, and we've been gathered, as I personally see it. The reason we've been gathered is because the hardest part sometimes of this process of being yourself is kind of those waves that let us go back into hiding. And I know for sure that if I didn't have people like you, people like the other folks in soft power, to see that, like, okay, it's really, really hard to commit everything. My marriage failed, my family relationships are strained, I'm never had less money, but not to be depressing, but I see other people just as committed, and every time things have hit the fan collectively, I've been so strengthened and so inspired, seeing that others are just as dedicated and willing to show up in that rawness. And so that's what I appreciate about you. Just like watching you go through it, Marta, and just seeing like everything that's been thrown your way this year, I could cry. That's just like, yeah, like we've refused to go into hiding, being white people on YouTube talking about Reiki. Probably in the past, I might have cringed at my own self, but we are here because we know that we're so sure that if others don't understand it, we get why we're being pulled to these conversations and pulled to one another. And the lines are blurring. We're in a liminal state of the universe right now. Like everything is getting like loosening and blurring to be re-solidified with consent and with agency. And that's why I'm like, yeah, like we're gonna it's just about asking the questions. We don't have the answers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I am just want to say I'm so grateful for you, because if not for Soft Power, I would totally have retreated and gone into hiding this year. Like, yeah.
Yeah, same. So shout out to Soft Power. If this is your first time hanging with us, please subscribe, get on our email list. We're really gearing up for more of this next year and more gathering. What do we do? I don't know. Sometimes we just talk and are sharing where we're at. Sometimes we are really getting into the nitty gritty of what we're doing here on this earth, trance journeys, somatic practices, building our care offerings. And so check out Marta's. She's an incredible cosmic energy channel. Now that you've heard the definition, we're going to use that. As well as a pet psychic, a pet healer. So reach out to her. That's her zone of genius. I work with a lot of birthing people. I'm a doula. You can check me out too. I got to update the description actually. But thanks for hanging out with us. And if you feel called to join this conversation, reach out. I would love to open this up with others, either privately or on live stream again. I hope this is something that we can continue to lead with, because I'm really proud of us for just leading with our experience. So thanks, Marta.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.